Go ahead.
Can you guys see my screen okay? Yes, awesome. Wonderful. All righty, we'll get started. So thank you for having me, for introducing me. So as a health and human science educator, one of our program areas are family, food, health, and money. So we do programming like financial literacy, eating healthy, and family programs. One of our family programs is called I Am Moving, I Am Learning. And it just teaches caregivers how to get kids more active and combat childhood obesity, which is a very growing issue in the country. And so one of our modules for our I Am Moving, I Am Learning is this one called Moving with the Brain in Mind. So it's kind of like a condensed version, but I think it'll still be very much applicable. Before we like to do our presentation, we always like to mention how we are a affirmative action institution, and we don't discriminate on the basis of gender, race, national origin, and of course, if any accommodations are needed, please let us know. So we'll be talking about 3 overarching ideas. So I'll be mentioning a couple of phrases. One of them would be the body trains the brain. So talking a little bit about early brain structure development and how that plays a role in skill development. Then we'll be talking about, I'll be talking about importance of engaging kids in like play-based activities and how that can really fundamental in improving their skill development. And another phrase that we'll be mentioning, or I'll be mentioning, is called cross the midline. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but it's really important. And we'll talk about different ways in which to get kids to try to cross the midline more often. So a lot of kids engage in everyday tasks that they do. A lot of these help them with their minds, it helps them with the body, and it helps them to understand and interact with the environment and the world that they are around. Kids just naturally like to engage in play-based activities, and these are really important because it helps to stimulate all different areas in the brain. So for a lot of us as adults, if we want to go and work out to get physically active, we're just like, we'll go to the gym, lift some weights, or go out for a walk or go for a run, which really is like a toddler to go, start pumping some weights. So for the kids' version of that is just being physically active and going outside, playing, play-based activities. Those are just easy and great ways to get kids physically active without really, making it much of a big deal. But these are important, and it helps them to grow their motor skills. So like the gross and fine motor skills. So working those bigger muscles, working those smaller muscles, helps them with their physical growth, helps them with their strength, stamina, and also helps with flexibility as well. So a little bit of the structure anatomy of neurons. We'll be talking about the brain. So this is a neuron, which is a brain cell essentially. And chemical signals called neurotransmitters, they usually go and are bind to dendrites, which are the receiving end of a neuron, and then it goes down the axon, and then the chemicals are released into this gap called a synapse. And neurons don't necessarily touch, but they just send signals. So this neurotransmitters are in the synapse, and then they bind to another dendrite, and then the signal continues to flow. I explained it very slowly, but of course in the brain, this happens very, very quickly. So that's how the brain essentially communicates from one cell to the other. So speaking of the brain cells, these are the brain activity at 3 different stages in life. So can anybody tell me, from looking at the first column, what are some things that they notice? Or I guess comparing it to the other 3, what's some things that they notice about the first column?
There's a lot of space in between.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, compared to the other 2, there's a lot of white space you can see between them. Are they easier to see or are they more interconnected like the other ones?
Seems like there are like a large group with just a small amount of connections to it.
Right, so we can see that there's a lot of they're a lot more spread out. There's not as many. There's a lot of wide space. So this is actually the brain activity of a baby, and so we can see that there's not many neural connections going on. They're a lot more independent. And you can see these like the dendrites and the axon. There's not much connection going on. And then we move on to the next one. Can you guys see any difference between that? Anything stands out compared to the first one? You can see compared to the first one, there's a lot less white space, right? There's more connections being made, so they're more interconnected and interwoven. It's hard to differentiate single, like what each neuron is compared to the first one. Like this is obvious to see, this one's obvious to see, but it's kind of hard to tell in this one. And this is a neural activity of a 6-year-old. So you can see as kids continue to grow older and start to develop, they continue to make all those connections through the skills that they learn, activities that they are engaged with, and those help to form and make more connections. So they strengthen connections, but they also make more connections as well. So going from a baby to just even 6, like you can see the drastic difference between the neural connectivity between them. And then the last one you can see is that it's almost an in-between between the first and the second. There are some neural connections and overlap, but there's not as much. And this is a process that happens called pruning. And so as we get older, this is, I guess you can tell this is from neural activity of an adult. But as we get older, neural connections that we've made that we don't use all the time, or skills that we learned and we just aren't using them anymore, the connections start to fade and there's less connections. So as we get older, through processing of pruning, we start to lose those connections that we made. So you can tell it's a natural thing that happens, but also just shows how important it is. It just shows how important it is to continue to engage in those activities, right? Learning new skills, getting kids active and moving along. It helps them to strengthen those connections because as we go older, naturally, we don't always use the same skills that we learned growing up. And so naturally we'll start to lose those connections. So the more you can make as kids are growing older, the more important it is and the better it is as they naturally start to learn. So the brain is very adaptive, kind of looking from the last slide, right? As you continue to make more connections through activities, through engagement, the brain starts to make more neural connectivity. And so through different experiences that we have or lack of experiences for kids, that can really affect the types of connectivity that they make. And as I mentioned before, the more that they engage in certain activities or learning different skill sets, it helps to strengthen those neural connections and make more. So it's always important to get kids moving, active, and engaging in new experiences, not just as kids, but also as they continue to grow older as well. I'm sure some of us have heard of the phrase move it or lose it. And so movement is a big part of, and physical activity is a big part of continuing to strengthen those neural connections. And so it really is important to continue to get kids to keep moving. As I mentioned before, naturally, skill sets we're not using as we grow older, they start to prune. And so it really is important to continue to, as kids grow older, it's important to continue to get them engaged and to continue to stimulate those neural connections as they grow older. If they don't, then they start to lose those connections. So focusing more on, I know this is a lot, I apologize, but focusing more on this area of the brain, it shows you what parts of the brain are activated when you take a drink from a cup. So you can see the pink one here, this is for thinking and planning. And then the green one here is coordination. And then the red one here is like voluntary movement. Blue is tactile and touch, like pressure, temperature, pain. And then yellow is sensory processing. So I thought it was very interesting personally because, like I mentioned, taking a drink from a cup is a very simple task, but you can see that just with that simple action, so many parts of the brain are being stimulated and engaged. So really it's important just to show you that just little things and little activities and acts and tasks that we do really do help to engage the brain. So moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit more about, I think I mentioned a phrase called crossing the midline. And so this is an example, or this is starting to talk about what crossing the midline means. So in the brain, we have this connective tissue called the corpus callosum, and it divides the brain into the left and the right half. You can kind of see in the middle right here. And I think most of us know the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. And so in a way, our brains are already crossing the midline in that sense, right? Because the left side controls the right side and the right controls the left. And so this is really important because it helps to, that's how the brain has to communicate when they cross over that corpus callosum. And so getting kids to engage in both sides of their body helps to continue and strengthen those connectivity and communication between both sides of the brain. So you can kind of see in this picture over here, the little kid's riding the tricycle. And so that goes left, right. And so they're using both sides of their body. So that's really important and continues to help with making connection between both sides of the brain. Similarly to this side as well, engaging those physical movements. So if he's throwing on one hand, pulling with the other, engaging and using both hands, both feet, the whole body, that helps to strengthen communication from both sides of the brain. So in addition to the corpus callosum being a midline, we also have like anatomical midlines as well. And so the left and right, we have a sagittal plane. And so that divides our body into left half and right half. And we have the transverse plane. So that divides your body into the top and bottom. So like starting at like your belly button. And then the frontal plane divides the body into front and back. So never think of an activity that might get kids to cross the midline. If you need a hint, just look at the picture. Head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Has anybody played that as a kid? Right, those are a couple of examples of crossing the midline. So you can see, just looking at the picture, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. So they're crossing that transverse plane. So going from top to bottom. So it's important, as well as mentioned before, it strengthens the connectivity between both sides of the brain, helping as it continues the communication from left to right, right to left. And so getting kids to participate in activities that do that naturally is help to strengthen those connections. So like head, shoulders, knees, and toes, the hokey pokey, just activities like that are just simple and easy ways to get kids to cross the midline. So crossing the midline is important, not just in like our whole like body movement for kids, but also for running the little things as well, working those little muscles. So it also helps them with their reading, writing, and even like their math skills. So I'm just thinking back to the days when you're learning how to write. For example, whenever we would write an A, we would always help to start from top to bottom and then do a little curve. So you can see that their alphabets on the left, they usually start at the midline, and then you might have to have a curve on the left, like a C or an A or a D, but always starts at the midline and works its way around. And similarly, on the right side, that the alphabets also start at the midline as well, and then you write a curve like for a B or an H, right? So starting at the midline teaches them also how to write those skills. Additionally, looking down here, other alphabets as well start or cross the midline. So an I, or even just a T across the midline, or W crossing the midline as well. So crossing midline is important because it also helps them on like a smaller scale, if you will, with writing and reading skills as well. So that's also really important. This is just another example. So again, whenever we were growing up and they're teaching us how to write letters, it will tell us to start from the top, work our way down, and start again from the midline and write those curves like curvy. So again, this just reinforces how it helps them with their reading and their writing skills. Additionally, it also helps them with their directional vocabulary. So these talk about starting from the top to the bottom, going from left to right, up, down, straight, curve, zigzag, right? So teaching kids how to cross the midline while they're learning to write also helps them with the directional vocabulary as well. Again, this is just another example of crossing midline while they're writing their letters. And so again, using those directional vocabulary, starting from the top, working their way down, up, down, left to right, right? These are just little ways in which kids can continue to cross the midline, but also help with their readiness to learn to read and write. Also, like as they're reading, like in a book, people like kids follow with their fingers. So as they move from left to right, up, down, right, they're also crossing the midline in doing that way as well. So really just help them while they're in school as well. Okay, looking at this picture, can anybody tell me something that they all have in common? Or that you think they might have in common?
The motion is back and forth.
Yeah, they're all moving. And does anybody know what system in the body is associated or helps with movement? Or sensing movement, I say? Specify sensing of movement. Or where you can find it in the body, some of the exact name. It is in our vestibular system. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But the vestibular system helps with sensing, motion, and balance in the body. So the vestibular system is in the inner ear. The semicircular canal is right here. This is actually one of the before fully formed organs before a baby is born. But it helps with the child's sense, well, I guess adults as well, but it helps with their sense of motion and balance. So it's important to get kids physically moving and active because it helps them to increase this vestibular stimulation. So their body is learning their sense of awareness and their body awareness and their sense of space as well as they continue to grow. So as they're moving from left to right, side to side, their body is able to sense where they are in space. So it's important also to get kids to keep moving because it also helps to stimulate their sense of motion. And the brain, there's like senses in the ear that will send signals to the brain so the brain knows where the child is moving. So that's really important because as you continue to get kids moving, I also continue to strengthen the connection between and the signals that we get that goes to the brain to tell the brain that, oh, the child is moving, they're going left to right, side to side, and it helps them with their sense of spatial awareness. So that's also something to keep in mind and the importance of getting kids active. And just looking from the previous picture, I'm sure you can see all the pictures where things that kids can do at the park. So the park is a place to energy just like run out of the kids, but also like a brain playground. Like that's where while they're going on slide, when they're swinging left to right, side to side, going up and down the slides, the monkey bars, climbing, running, right? All this movement that the kids are doing, it's helping with a sense of motion, spatial awareness. It's also crossing different midlines. And so it just shows how important it is playgrounds are, but also the importance of just letting kids be active and run around. It really does help them in so many different aspects as they continue to develop. So music and movement have been shown to be influential in language. And so the vestibular system is helpful and it plays a role in that. It helps them to sense their hearing, and which allows them to help and feel a rhythm as well. And kids usually, I guess by like kindergarten, they should be good at like balancing. And so a lot of children that are toddlers by the age of 2 and 3, some of them have trouble with like balancing or being steady or keeping a beat. And so it's also very important to, at an early age, continue to get kids moving and help them with that vestibular stimulation to teach them how to balance and teach their body and their brain how to continue to make those connections and learn their sense of space.
The vestibular system is fully developed in the last trillion.
Can you guys hear that?
Remember the complete plants have no small hairs on legs in the centipede that detect the motion of fluid in the canals. Those signals about movement and then sent to the brain and they help form an awareness of motion. And movement. Music is another way of learning. Music is responded to universal laws. It's not good to understand that music and language are very intertwined. Music and rhythms are usually really good. My language. You look at different cultures around the world, you'll find distinct patterns of rhythm and music. Spoken language is a special type of rhythm. Language is a lyric system of expression with music. Languages of respond and learn from music and rhythms.
So I mentioned before at the very beginning that you'll hear this term called the body trains the brain. And just throughout the whole presentation, I get you can kind of see that as kids are continuing to move, they're engaging in play-based activities, going to the park, on the swings, riding their bicycle, right? All these different movements that they do, sending signals to their brain, and it's helping to make those neural connections. And the more connections they make, the stronger they are and the more they are. And so the body really does train the brain. So just emphasizes the importance of getting kids to move more, to be physically active, engaging in their senses, them bouncing on one foot, like hopscotch, like that's another way to get kids to engage in vestibular stimulation, help them to learn the sense of balance and motion and spatial awareness. So the body really does train the brain in a lot of different aspects. So as kids continue to get more engaged, move around, it really does help to strengthen those connections in the brain. So also a very important thing to emphasizing is getting kids active, because that really does help them neurologically. It helps to strengthen those connections. And as we saw before, pruning happens naturally as we get older. So the more that kids can learn, get more development and skills as they are younger, the better it is as we continue to develop. Additionally, sometimes there's, while engaging in those activities and skills and play, there are different props or toys that kids might not have. So creating them and manipulating different objects to use is also a fun and creative way to get kids continue to be active and moving and flowing.
The audio didn't work very well for the last video. So I was just wondering if you could maybe summarize what came out of that, or what you'd like us to understand about what was in there.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. So I guess that was just going to be a video of kids. So I guess it's more of an observational video. So the video will show kids that are moving around. They are marching in a circle with their teacher. So the teacher has them with different like props. It's like drumsticks, so they're swinging it on top of their head, they're doing it down low, they're doing it at their back, to the front, they are walking sideways, they are marching. So this teacher shows an example of how kids are just always moving around, how they are manipulating different props, how they are crossing the midline because they're going up and down and sideways. They were using both sides of the brain while they're marching, going left and right. And so just these are little ways and fun ways we can get kids to use all the different things that we've learned. The crossing the midline, vestibular simulation. So as you continue to work with different kids, whether it's your own kid or this caregiver or your caregiver, finding different ways to get kids active and being creative with it. Like they had drumsticks, but I don't think they were actually drumsticks. So they probably like little tube or pipes that they made, right? So just manipulating props and just encouraging and getting kids active is always really important. But again, just emphasizing the idea of how the body trains the brain. And so this little summary of how things, what we talked about today. It's important to continue to develop and maintain healthy minds, bodies for these little kids. And so again, just summarizing the importance, we'll start with this one. Ability to use both sides of the brain. As I mentioned before, the corpus callosum is really important. Connecting and communicating between both sides of the brain means using both sides of the body, means using the whole body for kids. So it's important to continue to keep that in mind while you're working with kids as well. Understanding language and word association. So I mentioned before how movement can also help with language development. How crossing the midline and learning to write the alphabet can help with language development as well. So all of us have additional benefits while you're getting kids moving, active, and crossing different midlines. Another one is the ability to explore and manipulate objects. So sorry, the video couldn't play well. As I mentioned before, the kids were drumming with different sticks. It wasn't actually drumsticks. They looked like they were like pipes. And so just being creative with different props you have, because sometimes I think that can limit how active you can get kids to be. And so manipulating different props, things that you don't already have, using them to engage kids, keep them active, is also a good way to continue to help them make those connections as well. The ability to control movement in space. So as I mentioned before, the vestibular system, our inner ear, helps with our sense of motion and spatial awareness. And so for a kid to understand their spatial awareness, they have to start to move more. So like hopscotch is a fun game, bouncing on one foot, right? Just teaching them and getting them moving helps them to learn their sense of space as they are continuing to move. And lastly, their balance, feeling muscle force, and touch sensation. This is going back to the image where in the brain is taking a drink from a cup, is engaging so many parts of the brain, including our senses. So getting kids active, using different props, activity-based that uses those senses, helps them with their gross motor skills, their fine motor skills, learning different balance. So finding different and creative ways to get kids moving, as we mentioned before, with the whole body trains the mind. That helps to strengthen those connections in the brain and helps them with their skills as they continue to grow and develop. I guess this is more of a concluding slide, but there might have been things on here that you probably knew already. Well, hopefully there's at least one thing on here that you didn't know. And so I guess the question just for you to self-reflect, if you want to feel free to share, but something to just self-reflect is, what are you doing now? Are kids are they having a lot of free time to go and move around? Are you using different props? Are they being active? Are they engaging in those senses? That's something to keep in mind if you're not doing. And what new ideas can you try? So hopefully, like I mentioned, you may have known some of the things that I talked about today, but hopefully there's some new ideas that were sparked when you were attending this presentation. What's something that you haven't tried before, or you were thinking you should try, and now you have the idea to do it, or you wanted to try something new but didn't know how to do it, and now you might know. So what's something new that you can try to incorporate with the kids that you yourself have, or even the kids that you work with and the families that you work with as well? And then just thinking about how you can use this information. So as I mentioned before, childhood obesity is a big reason why this program was created, and it's been a cross-country program. Childhood obesity is a big issue here in Indiana. I think it's like a third of children under the age of 5 are obese. And so it is a pretty big health conditions here across different countries, but I know that different states, and definitely here in Indiana. So physical activity movement is really, really important. As I mentioned before, kids don't have to go to the gym, but just getting them outside or going to the park, just getting them moving, also helps them with physical activity, but also helps them as they continue to develop and grow as they get older. And that's included my slides. I guess I talked a little faster than I expected. I apologize, but again, thank you guys so much for listening. If you have any questions about this program, I'm learning, or about this module I did, moving with the brain and mind, please let me know. And Nick, if you wouldn't mind sharing, I had a link to a survey. It's optional, so you definitely don't have to take it at all, but if you would, it just tells you a little bit about the different things that we learned today, and if you learned something new. But that, I think, is it for me. So thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
just
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I just posted the link to the survey in the chat. But did anybody have any questions or comments that they wanted to bring up to discuss what we've talked about during Audie's presentation, or anything from today?
So my video was going in and out for some reason. I don't know why, so I apologize for that. I just thought I left the video alone and stopped thinking it, but I apologize, my video was going in and out.
So Audie, I was wondering, maybe can you just briefly talk about what it is that Purdue Extension, like some of the programs that you're doing?
Yeah, so we have a lot of different programs, specifically for children and family. So we have this one I mentioned called I'm Moving, I'm Learning. I actually have another slide here. So this is the module I was talking about. So there's about 10 different modules, but they all aim at like increasing physical activity. So all 10 talk about essentially childhood obesity. So physical activity, the importance of nutrition, getting kids moving. So that's a big thing that we do here after the extension with this I Am Moving, I Am Learning program. We have strengthening families programs that help with families as well. We have a lot of nutrition-based programs, eating healthy, meal planning, learning about food allergies. We have financial literacy. We have financial literacy program or resource program. So learning where does your money go, about budgeting, about staying safe on the internet, preventing scam and identity theft. We also have a lot of like health development ones. So importance of sleep, of substance use in teens. We have Be Heart Smart, which is about like heart health. Dining with diabetes, which is about eating while diabetic. So we have a lot of different programs that range in the field of family, food, health, and money. But we kind of try to touch on different aspects of it all, because health is very inclusive. Exclusive, I'm not sure the word, but it's very encompassing. That's the word. It's very encompassing. So a lot of different things play a role in our health. Whether it's getting enough sleep, what we eat, finances, so all that can contribute to different parts of our health.
Sorry, I'm wondering if anybody here who's attending this presentation today, if you work with young children, I mean, does anybody like work with movement with young children?
I mean, I come from a job. I'm just like 3 weeks on juvenile probation right now. So like I come from a job that it was working ABA therapy, it's autism behavior analysis. And a lot of that fine motor skill, I can see the correlation with how you would teach fine motor skills with both hands and like being able to pick up and a lot of stuff that we take for granted as adults because we do it so smooth most of the time. is very hard to teach sometimes. And props goes to you, Audie, because it's like being able to teach the very, I guess, minute details of the task is actually like very hard. So like props goes to you. But yes, I did have a question. How do you or excuse me, not how, what do you see the correlation between learning and movement kind of playing? So like not just fine motor skills, but like if you're moving and you're doing something, something that I've recognized for myself, being self-aware, is like I'm able to communicate better if my hands are moving, like, and so on and so forth. Is that does that correlate with like the brain and stuff like that, or how does that work?
Good question. So I think as there are different things that you mentioned that we do that we take for granted or don't realize that we're necessarily doing. So I think a part of that also is just like as you develop and when you do certain things together, I think it's those connections that are constantly being made. So when you do one thing and you continue to do like something pair with something else, then your body recognizes that they kind of almost go hand in hand, if that makes sense. And so I think as you continue to do one thing while doing something else, then it becomes like it's like a pair. So I think that's probably why it like you see that association is that your body recognizes that they kind of go hand in hand. So you
Gotcha.
So it's all in a way interconnected.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks. Good question. Good question.
And then also, are these something that we talk about, you know, young children and they have like a window to learn, but if you're working with, say, older adults or people who have learning disabilities, you know, do you find that the brain reacts differently or the connections are harder to make?
Yeah, that's another good question. So I think it's easier to do it as kids when they're younger versus adults because for kids, there's this thing called neuroplasticity. And so they kind of compare it to a sponge. So a kid's brain can like absorb so much because as you saw like many slides ago, all those neurons are very spaced out. There's a lot of white space. There's not really much connection. So they're ready to make those connections as a baby, as a kid. And so it's a lot easier for kids to learn and pick up those different skills because their brain's ready to make connections. But as we get older, it's the neuroplasticity isn't really, I mean, you can still learn as you get older, but it's usually more difficult as you grow older. So I think people have heard like when you're older, it's harder to learn a different language versus when you're a kid, because the neuroplasticity when you're a child is not there when you're an adult. So you can definitely still learn as you get older, but it will not be as quick as it is when you were a kid or as kids continue to grow up and develop. So it definitely is harder. It's not as we were when you're kids, but it definitely is possible. It's just not as easy as it is when you're as compared to when kids are growing up and developing.
Audie, could you talk more about neuroplasticity?
Ooh, I don't know how much more I know about neuroplasticity. But essentially it's kind of what I mentioned before, is that the brain, they kind of compare it to like a sponge. And so mentioning, like I said in the other the slide, kids' brains, they don't have many connections. And so the brain, one neuron can make like 15,000 connections, just one. And so as kids are growing, those neurons want to connect. They want to make those connections. There's so many possibilities. And so as you continue to learn different skills, they're like, it's a lot faster and quicker for them to learn. I don't see comparing it to like if neurons are hungry, like if they see food, they want to like grab it kind of thing. So when kids are learning, like you start to pick up, and it's such a quick, what's the word? Like it just happens very quickly because the skills that they learn are skills that they're going to use their whole life. And so, and I think Cam mentioned before, like it's easy for us as adults to take it for granted. But as kids, it's just very quick and easy because the brain wants to make those connections. Like, and you start to pick something up, That's one connection. And picking something small leads to picking something larger, or like cutting scissors can lead to using puppets for your hand, can lead to picking up larger things, right? So your brain is quick and ready to learn. And so it's almost like I compare it to like almost like a hunger for something. Like they see it, they want to grab it. So that's essentially kind of how like neuroplasticity works. It's very eager and ready to make connections because it's all kind of isolated. But as you get older and you've done those connections and we don't strengthen them, they start to prune away. But kids' neuroplasticity is very big because they don't have those connections yet. And their brain neurons are ready to learn. So they're just eager to make those connections. That's why it's very important to get kids active and moving and engaged, because their brain is like a sponge and just wants to absorb all these different skills and knowledge.
All right, well, yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
I just want to say one more thing. I've been talking, I know. No, like there's like, so I'm a brain nerd, but I didn't go to school for psychology or nothing. But like just because I enjoy understanding why and how the muscles work and how we learn. I think about like I grew up playing football and whatnot, and a lot of the turnover from play to play is making that connection on what your motion or where you're supposed to move in the play. And for me, I never really thought about it like the way we learn also is like contributing it to what we've already learned. And it's really cool because I'm over here, we do some of the behaviors because we've learned the behavior. And that's a question, like what do you see it's easier to unlearn or unconnect a certain way of how we respond to things, like if that happens?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say yes, because it's almost like a muscle. Like the more you continue to do it and use it, so the more you continue to do and use it, the stronger it becomes. And so it's that neural, like it's a highway, right? It's been used very often. So it knows what it's doing. And so if you do it pretty frequently, then it's comes and goes easily. So if you want to not make that connection anymore, then it's something it's used to. It's very hard for it to stop using that connection, or that highway. It's hard for it to not use that highway because that's the way it uses all the time. And so it is harder to let go of something or to not do a habit anymore because your brain's made that connection, made a strong connection. That's what we do. That's how we do it. And so it is possible, but it is harder because you've developed that habit and that connection has been there for a while and it's been strengthened. And so it's hard to not do it. It's possible, but it's harder because it's been used to doing it for so long and that connection is very strong. So yes.
It's almost like unwrapping things, but yeah, I know we gotta go, so I'll stop talking.
Well, it is just about 1 minute until this session ends. So I do want to say thank you to Adi. That was really fascinating and interesting. Thank you so much. And please visit the Btcc website. It will have all of the sessions today will be on there, and you can rewatch them and go over what it is that you saw today. And also there is going to be a wrap-up session, kind of a connecting the dots at the end of the day. And that link is going to get put in the chat. I think it's probably already there.
Yeah.
It's the bottom link of the ones there.
Okay, great. Yeah, so go ahead and when this session closes, just pop on over there. And thank you to everybody.
Do it before the
for
session
joining us today.
closes, please.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, do it before this closes. So thanks, everybody. And I hope to see you in just a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Audie. This is really great.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Are you gonna be there tomorrow for the sessions or no?
I know I don't believe it was the last day. Probably only 2 days.